When you've been with your spouse for a long time, it's very possible, very easy in fact, for you to become too familiar with them, for you to take them for granted. So what are the telltale signs that you are taking your spouse for granted? Number one, you don't bother in pleasing them sexually or in engaging in foreplay or to prepare them for sexual activity. When it comes to sex, it's all about your needs. You want something, you get it. You're using your spouse's body to satisfy your personal, individual sexual pleasure. You're not considering your spouse's preference. You're not considering your spouse's desires. You're not considering your spouse's pleasure. You can get your orgasm, your climax, but then your spouse, no, it doesn't matter. Number two, you don't pay attention to the things that your spouse complains about or gives feedback about. When your spouse is raising a concern that I would love this, that hey, you can do better over here, hey, you hurt me when you do this, you pay your spouse no mind. You don't even care. You're not even considering your spouse's perspective, your spouse's viewpoint, or your spouse's needs in the marriage. When your spouse is correcting you, you put a mental block. You become defensive. Earlier on, you used to care. You used to be so considerate. Number three, you don't even bother to apologize when you're wrong. You don't bother to say, I'm sorry. In fact, you've gotten so numb that you don't even care about your spouse's emotions. You could be hurting him or her, and you just keep on as if life is normal. Number four, you don't bother in appreciating and telling your spouse thank you. When was the last time you appreciated your spouse? When was the last time you thanked your spouse? Or has your spouse become this person whereby you're thinking, why should I thank you for what you do for a family? Why should I thank you for what it is that you do for me, for what you do for the home? After all, it's what you're supposed to be doing. Now that is somebody who has grown too familiar with their spouse. Number five, you join other people in belittling or frustrating your spouse. So whether it is your parents, your family, your relatives, your friends, or anyone who's out to put down your spouse, you actually join them, or even you allow it to happen. You don't stop them, you don't defend your spouse, you don't cover your spouse, you don't care. Number six, you're no longer bothered to pray for your spouse. Because we pray for people who matter to us. We hold them in high regard and we present them to the Lord. Now, when you've grown too familiar with your spouse, you don't bother to pray for them. And even sometimes when you do make those prayers, it is those very selfish, one-sided prayers where you're telling God, do this for my spouse, or change my spouse like this, or, may bad things happen to my spouse. Lord, teach my spouse a lesson. So very, very one-sided and selfish prayers, which even God doesn't answer. Then the next thing for you to know, I think this is number six, of you have actually grown too familiar with your spouse. You're no longer bothered about your spouse's dream, about their goals, how they want to grow in life. It's none of your business. You completely dissociate yourself from it. So you have grown too familiar with your spouse. Number seven, you lack empathy. You can see your spouse breaking down. You can see your spouse is tired. You can see your spouse even crying, but you're not moved at all. You're so indifferent to your spouse's experience, you don't even care. You don't even care. Number eight, you have reduced your spouse to somebody that you have children with. Your spouse is no longer your romantic partner. Your spouse is no longer somebody that you can see as a companion. You're no longer bothered. Like, you are not seeing your spouse for more than just a parent. All you're seeing is, yes, my spouse, the father, my spouse, the mother of our children. Take away the children and you too have nothing. Number nine, the ninth thing that actually is a sign that you have taken your spouse for granted, you become too familiar. You don't make an effort to impress your spouse. You don't dress up well for your spouse. You don't make an effort to smell good for your spouse. You don't make an effort to do something that may, appease your spouse's five senses. So that is the sense of touch, the sense of sight, the sense of smell, the sense of what it is that they are hearing, the sense of taste. You're no longer bothered to be able to impress, to make them, admire you. Number 10, you are okay with spending less time with your spouse. In fact, you look for excuses not to spend time with your spouse. You know, you're like, hey, you either spend too much time at work, you spend too much time doing another thing, doing XYZ, you are never at home. You actually come home when your spouse is asleep or exhausted so that you can get to have minimal conversations. Now that is familiarity. Familiarity breeds contempt. Now the next telltale signs that actually you've grown too familiar with your spouse. Number 11. You can actually drop your spouse to be with other people. You will drop your spouse to spend time with your friends. Drop your spouse to travel far away with another individual. Drop your spouse to actually speak for long with somebody else. You are enjoying other people's company more than your spouse's company. You are actually basking. Your spouse is actually seeing you lighting up when you're spending time with other people. Your spouse has become jealous, insecure of how you're treating other people. Why? Because you're no longer putting into consideration what is actually good on your spouse. And then, of course, number 12, you are very critical of your spouse. Every time you speak to your spouse, it has to be something negative. You are quick to bring up a fault of your spouse than you are to notice something good about your spouse. It's constantly negative tone, negative feedback. Even the way your persona, your facial expression whilst talking to this individual that you call your husband, your wife, it is very, 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 very mean. So look at yourself and look at how it is that you relate with your spouse. Is it wholesome? Is it loving? Is it kind? Do not grow familiar with the one person you said I do to and you're supposed to be building life with. Make it fresh. Keep it moto moto.
This is Grown TV.